The airlock's hydraulic shriek was the last sound the mercenaries heard. Atmosphere violently evacuated into the Jovian void, tearing data pads and discarded kinetic rifles toward the reinforced glass. Among the spinning debris of explosive decompression drifted a perfectly knotted charcoal silk tie. It belonged to the gray-haired man floating effortlessly through the rear blast doors. His wire-rimmed spectacles sat perfectly level on his nose. Magnetic boots clicked onto the deck plating. The shipmaster gasped, his lungs compressing, his scales turning a bruised purple in the vacuum. "Enter your command authorization," the old man said. "The part of the official report that remained highly classified happens right about now." 4 hours earlier, the Aegis orbital summit smelled of synthetic champagne and bureaucratic stagnation. A glittering chandelier of glass and polysteel suspended in the neutral zone above Jupiter's shadow. It hosted delegates from a dozen systems arguing over trade tariffs, border disputes, and mineral rights. Sleek serving droids hummed between velvet-lined tables, their polished chassis reflecting the distant, swirling storms of the gas giant outside the reinforced observation windows. Calder Voss rubbed his left knee. A dull, rhythmic ache throbbed beneath the joint, a permanent souvenir from a poorly executed orbital drop over the Sirius colony exactly 2 decades prior. He wore a heavy charcoal suit tailored just slightly too loose across the shoulders, a calculated sartorial choice designed to hide the thick, corded scars of a shoulder holster. "The phosphorus yields from the Martian terraforming sector are completely unacceptable," Ambassador Henderson droned, gesturing aggressively with a manicured hand. "We are looking at a 3% deficit by Q4. "Simply exquisite," Voss murmured. He was internally rating the vintage of his synthetic champagne a dismal 3.2 out of 10. He set his tarnished silver teaspoon down on the wet linen buffet table, its bowl pooled with spilled champagne, catching the harsh artificial light. He did not pick it up again. The northern atrium blast doors blew inward with a concussive roar. Superheated air and melted polyglass washed over the screaming diplomatic delegates. Voss dropped his glass. He curled into a trembling ball beneath the nearest serving table, burying his head beneath his arms like a terrified civilian. His resting heart rate remained exactly 60 beats per minute. 12 hostiles breached the settling smoke. Avian and reptilian biologies, heavily armed, moving in a remarkably sloppy wedge formation. Syndicate mercenaries, amateurs relying on brute force rather than precision. A massive scaled hand dragged him outward by the collar, tearing his jacket. "Please," Voss stammered, letting his voice crack an octave higher. "Undersecretary level 8, I have a pension. My government will pay." The towering reptilian commander chuckled, his jagged dorsal spines twitching with amusement. "Your government will pay a fortune for you, bureaucrat." Voss deliberately let his aching knees buckle. It was a standard dead-weight technique. The commander grunted, suddenly forced to support the human's entire mass, completely failing to notice Voss slipping a microscopic tracking filament into the mercenary's tactical webbing. They marched the trembling agronomist through ruined corridors and shoved him onto a waiting corsair. Through slitted eyes, Voss meticulously catalogued the vessel. Deck plating vibrational frequencies indicated a Lockheed Boeing C-1300, illicit Class 4 fusion drive. Or rather, it used to be a standard hauler before the syndicate bolted plasma cannons to the outer hull. The holding cell smelled of ozone, sweat, and dried blood. Thrown onto the grated floor, Voss curled his knees tightly to his chest, whimpering. The commander entered the cramped space, accompanied by a heavy-set avian guard. A brutal backhand strike snapped Voss's head sideways. He rolled his neck with the impact, absorbing and deflecting the kinetic force while actively ensuring his lips split against his teeth to sell the superficial injury. "Biometric clearances," the commander hissed. "Give them to me now." "I just manage hydroponic irrigation metrics," Voss cried out. The guard locked heavy magnetic restraints over the human's wrists. Voss went entirely still, suppressing a cold smile. The avian had applied the clamps directly over the wrist bones, leaving a crucial half-inch gap near the thumb joints. They turned the lights out and left him in the dark. Voss tasted the hot blood pooling in his mouth. He analyzed the synthetic metallic aftertaste, rolling it over his tongue. High iron content, slightly bitter from adrenaline. Then he braced his hands against his boots and dislocated both of his thumbs. The cartilage popped with a sickening, wet snap that echoed in the tiny cell. He slid his hands free of the metal cuffs and relocated the joints silently against his thigh, wincing only once. A blue light flickered in the corner of the cell. The room's illicit holoprojector engaged automatically. Secretary of Defense Sterling materialized in miniature, his projection flickering with heavy encryption artifacts. The two men stared at each other across the light years. Voss's left eye twitched twice. A microscopic nod followed. It was an operational sign code from the 7th Orbital Drop Regiment. Sterling didn't look panicked. His digital face showed only deep, profound pity. "You didn't take a hostage, Commander," the hologram broadcast to the bridge channels. "You took a retired Tier 1 Black Ops asset." The feed cut. Voss stood. His posture straightened, instantly shedding 20 years of manufactured bureaucratic slouch. He stepped to the cell door and bypassed the keypad using a localized short circuit generated by the battery in his wire-rimmed spectacles. The guard in the hallway didn't even have time to turn around. Voss stepped inside the avian's frantic swing, striking the soft throat cartilage with rigid knuckles. He grabbed the heavy helmet and twisted violently. The cervical spine snapped like a gunshot. Catching the falling plasma rifle before it clattered to the deck, Voss moved silently down the darkened corridor. Moving through the shadows of the retrofitted hauler, the undersecretary became a ghost. He bypassed the engineering deck, identifying a thermal exhaust vent that no syndicate mechanic had bothered to shield properly. He slid through the narrow maintenance shaft, the chilled metal pressing against his bruised ribs. He counted his breaths. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. 2 mercenaries patrolled the primary armory junction. Voss dropped from the ceiling grate silently behind them. He drove his elbow into the base of the first target's skull. Before the heavy body even hit the floor, Voss snatched the mercenary's sidearm, chambered around with one fluid motion, and pressed the hot muzzle directly under the second guard's chin. "Bridge access cipher," Voss whispered. His voice was gravel and ice. The reptile trembled, his pheromone glands secreting an acrid copper scent of pure terror. "Delta 97 Omega." Voss applied 50 pounds of precise pressure to the carotid artery, rendering the mercenary safely unconscious. He preferred them alive when tactically possible. Biological security clearances were occasionally quite useful. He swapped his ruined suit jacket for a stolen tactical vest and retrieved a suppressed P-90X kinetic submachine gun from the weapon rack. The weapon felt familiar, too familiar. The serial numbers were filed off, but the grip angle and weight distribution were distinctly Geneva manufacture. Someone from home had supplied this ship. The syndicate had grown painfully arrogant. 47 confirmed merchant vessel raids had taught them to fear heavily armored coalition dreadnoughts, not solitary old men crawling through their ventilation shafts. They mistook stolen technology for genuine tactical competence. Voss tapped a steady rhythm against the bulkhead. He reviewed the classified biometric data he had skimmed from the Aegis terminal moments before the explosion. Project Demeter. A highly weaponized terraforming microbe. An extinction-level asset disguised beneath layers of agricultural research. He checked the P-90X's magazine. 30 rounds of armor-piercing kinetic death. The corridor lights flickered to emergency crimson. Sirens began to wail. a dissonant, shrieking alarm that perfectly masked his heavy footsteps. He arrived at the rear magnetic blast doors of the bridge. The heavy steel hummed under his palms. He input the cipher, Delta 97 Omega. He waited exactly 3 seconds. Then he punched the manual airlock release on the opposing wall. The bridge airlock ripped open with devastating force. The hydraulic shriek deafened the entire compartment. Atmosphere violently evacuated into the Jovian void. The shipmaster shrieked, his claws gouging deep into the command console as his boots lifted completely off the deck plating. Unsecured data pads, discarded kinetic rifles, and heavy cargo crates smashed against the reinforced glass, sucked mercilessly toward the vacuum. Mercenaries blacked out in the zero-gravity maelstrom, their lungs compressing painfully under the massive differential pressure. For 3 agonizing seconds, the absolute void breathed into the bridge. Then the emergency ship protocols automatically engaged. The outer airlock slammed shut. Venting ceased instantly. Life support roared back to life, flooding the compartment with sterile, recycled oxygen. The magnetic blast doors at the rear hissed open. Calder Voss floated into the room. He had discarded the bloody tactical vest entirely. He was back in his ruined charcoal suit, his silk tie perfectly straightened against his chest. He pushed his wire-rimmed spectacles up the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. Magnetic boots clicked loudly onto the deck, gravity restored. He looked down at the syndicate shipmaster, who was trembling violently on his knees, gasping for air. "Enter your command authorization," Voss repeated softly. "Transfer full helm control to this unit." The shipmaster didn't hesitate. A scaled hand slammed onto the biometric scanner. Green light bathed the console. Coalition autopilot engaged. Voss leaned casually against the tactical holodable. "Now, let's have a frank discussion about who actually hired you." He pulled a folded flimsiplast document from his pocket and dropped it onto the glowing glass. "This ship is a Lockheed Boeing C-1300, Voss stated. "You don't have the schematics to bypass proprietary fusion locks. Furthermore, you bypassed the summit's biometric scanners using a localized code specific to Geneva. You were pointed directly at me, Captain." The shipmaster swallowed hard, his eyes wide. "Gregory Hayes, Apex Biologics." Voss nodded slowly. "I always hated his golf swing." He tapped the data drive, initiating an encrypted telemetry broadcast directly to Sterling's office. Back on Earth, Gregory Hayes would be securely in federal custody before the hour concluded. 2 hours later, a coalition breaching team swept the drifting freighter, lowering their rifles in total, utter confusion. The UNS Triton Alpha had expected a gruesome bloodbath. Instead, Joint Task Force 47 found unconscious mercenaries cleanly zip-tied to the corridor bulkheads. The surviving syndicate members huddled in the dark corners of the cargo bay, whimpering at every passing shadow. The squad leader stepped onto the bridge, his weapon dipping uncertainly toward the floor. Calder Voss sat comfortably in the shipmaster's elevated command chair. He had boiled a hot cup of synthetic Earl Grey using the emergency ration kit. A digital tablet rested on his knee, displaying a heavily annotated spreadsheet on Martian phosphorus fertilizer yields. "Undersecretary Voss," the squad leader asked. "Ah, Captain, right on time," Voss replied, not looking up from the glowing screen. "If you wouldn't mind taking these gentlemen into custody, I have an afternoon budget committee meeting I simply cannot miss." The tarnished silver teaspoon sat upright in the shipmaster's primary data port. It was bent slightly near the handle. It dripped warm Earl Grey into the sparking mainframe below.